Andy and I both regularly enjoy books written by women as well as works in translation, and August is officially, or maybe unofficially, I don't know who makes something official or not. Women
The
in
internet
translation.
has decided.
Yeah.
There's a hashtag, so it's official.
Yeah, it's a hashtag WIT month, Women in Translation, which is, any time of year is a good time to read books written by women, but we focus on it this month.
I'm going to look this up.
What are you looking up?
I'm going to look up who made it a thing.
Chad had mentioned it. There's an actual website that somebody made, and I believe 2013 was its first incarnation. And it doesn't look like they do too much with it now. Like, I've been tagging all of my social media posts with the official Women in Translation Month hashtags, and I haven't seen anybody comment or reshare. But anyway, that's what we're talking about today. Some of our favorite works in translation written by women, as well as 5 books each that we are looking forward to reading written by women in translation. Small caveat or asterisk for my list. I haven't read as many works in translation as you, generally speaking, so I didn't have like a huge pool to pull from.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to talk about more or less some of the 5 most recent.
Okay.
And which all of them I enjoyed to some extent or another. So,
I think mine is pretty similar. I know I messaged you this morning, like I think I've read 18 to 20 books in translation written by women. And there are a handful of them that, I enjoyed. But beyond, I enjoyed this book. I didn't really have a whole lot to say.
Sure.
So,
if you remove the in translation part of the equation, obviously my selection was much broader, but that's not what we're talking about. So, so before we get into it, as usual, we are doing our reading recap. Some people, or one person, I should say, requested that we timestamp the episodes to the point where the actual topic of the conversation begins. That's just like an extra layer of work that might sound simple, and it probably is, but I'm maxed out bandwidth wise. My editor, I don't want to give him another thing to do. So that's unlikely to happen. And that is the nature of long form podcasting. If you want a more curated experience, subscribe to the channel to watch the video essays that I make. I have a great one coming out. Well, once you're hearing this, it will already have been posted. However, that is the nature of podcasts. They're more conversational, so there will be tangents. And like I said, we're a ride or die pod.
Yeah.
You got to stick with us here. We're here for the general discussion, and then there's an overarching theme. So, reading updates. Andy, why don't you kick it off?
Okay. Well, I have read a little bit of more of The Dying Grass by Vollmann this week. It's good. I'm enjoying it. Haven't read a ton of it. I've been mainly focused on the other book I've been reading this week, which I'll get to in a second. But The Dying Grass is a really interesting book. I mean, Vollmann's a great writer. And the writing isn't anything too dense where like I'm getting lost in the writing, trying to figure out what's going on. But he does a really cool thing with the structure, where he'll kind of have the main narrative going, whether it's just like exposition or dialogue between 2 characters or something like that, and then the text will sporadically have like the next line will be indented more than just like your standard paragraph break indentation. And he'll do this a lot when the main narrative is like a passage of dialogue, and that indented text will be like the inner thoughts of one of the characters that's kind of having this conversation. Like if you and I were speaking, the text would be our conversation. And then, if I was annoyed with something you said or disagreed with it or something, but wasn't really like making that argument in the conversation. That indented text is that thought of like, it was a dumb thing to say, Tony. You know,
Sure.
And then
So it sounds somewhat similar to the style that Mario Vargas Llosa uses.
oh, okay.
Because he does that where two characters will be talking. One might be telling a story, and then there's dialogue within the story that's being told, and then there's someone interjecting into
Yeah.
the conversation while the story's being told.
Are those thoughts like separated, or is it all just kind of in the same?
No, it's all kind of in the same.
Yeah, so that's the difference. Is in this Vollmann, it's separate. Like it'll be a new paragraph, so to speak, and he kind of will do it like 2 or 3 layers deep. Like there will be, like I said, that kind of separate paragraph, second paragraph that's this like inner monologue of the character, and then sometimes there will be a third one that's like a description of the scenery around them. And then it'll go back into their conversation, and it kind of goes in and out. So it adds another layer to the novel where you get this bird's eye view of everything that's going on. So that's been really, really interesting read. And then the other novel that I've been reading primarily this week, I was hoping to get it finished in time because it definitely would fit into the category of books that I really enjoy by women in translation. It is The Case of Cem, or Cem. It's CEM.
What language is it from?
The language is Bulgarian, but so it's by Vera Mutafchieva, and it is about kind of a struggle for power in the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, yep, good.
In the Ottoman Empire in the tail end of the 15th century. So the Sultan or Khan or Sultan, of the Ottoman Empire dies, and he has 2 sons. And his oldest son just kind of, okay, I'm the Sultan now. And there's a large group of people, both within the Ottoman Empire and other, empires and kingdoms or whatever, during the time period, that think his younger son, Cem, should be the rightful Sultan.
This might blow your mind, but according to a quick Google search, it's actually Gem.
Gem, okay.
Pronouncenames.com.
Gem.
Okay, Gem. So The Case of Gem.
So, so it was written in Bulgarian, but the character's Turkish.
Yes.
So that's how you pronounce it in
Yes.
Turkish.
Yeah, Gem. So,
Learn something new every day.
yeah.
Just a side note, not to get too far off track here. As some of you, as our regular listeners and watchers may recall, there was a kerfuffle with the pronunciation from 100 Years of Solitude. And Andy got lambasted in the comment sections of both Instagram and TikTok eventually. And someone had said, like, you should have just Googled it. It's like the easiest thing to just Google. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because you don't Google something unless you're unsure about it.
Yeah.
Like, you did not realize that you had mispronounced it.
And I know that's not the correct pronunciation. Like I misspoke.
Correct. And that was the other factor too. I'm like, I say things incorrectly all the time. We don't
I misspoke.
Yeah, we don't do retakes on the show. So I mispronounce things all the time. Not that I don't know how the word is pronounced, but people misspeak.
Yeah.
And so someone was just like, this is so dumb. You should have just Googled it. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, why doesn't that make sense? And then they told me I was a dumb book bro.
Yeah.
And
But it's been a great novel. It's
we digress.
polyphonic novel, so tons of voices. It's kind of, they're referred to as like court testimonies. I don't really, it hasn't exactly been revealed, and I'm not sure if it will be, who the interviewer, so to speak, is. But it's told from the perspective of a bunch of different of the players in the case of Gem, kind of talking about their experience and their perspective of what happened, the power struggle, the political games, things like that. I had a thought recently. It kind of reminds me of Shogun.
Oh, cool.
And all the different characters kind of playing their game and running their schemes and strategies to try and get a leg up and advance their position. And it's a lot of that, and you're not really there are moments where you're like not really sure. Like, one character will kind of give his testimony and talk about certain events that happened, and then another will be talking about another series of events, but we'll kind of reference something that happened in the last testimony, and how it took place from their perspective. And it's kind of like, okay, what's the truth here? Like, who's telling it accurately? What actually happened in this scenario? Who's just scheming to get ahead? But it's been a great novel. I'm really enjoying it. I think you would really like it.
How long is it?
560 something pages.
Good size book.
And I'm about 2/3 through it.
Cool.
So,
anything else?
No, that's it.
So ironically, right now I'm not actually reading any works in translation from women. I was planning on more or less only reading works in translation from women during Women in Translation Month. However, after I finished To Hell with Cronia by Ingrid Winterbach, I was kind of craving reading a thick book, because a lot of my last few books I've read have been 350 pages or less, and I just didn't really have anything on my shelf, women in translation wise, that fit the bill. So I started The 40 Days in Musadag by Franz Werfel, and that's almost 900 pages. It's a work in translation. It was originally written in German, but I'm a slow reader, so I wanted to just take this week to kind of get a leg up on it.
Yeah.
And then starting probably this afternoon, I'll pick up a few, probably one of these books from the stack of women in translation I want to read. So I've been reading that, and it's good. It's not what I expected. I would say it's very Tolstoy-esque, like War and Peace-esque, which is, it's a really big story. There's a lot going on as far as characters. There's a lot of different perspectives. It's extremely heavy on narrative, very sparse on dialogue. Or I don't even know if saying it's heavy on narrative makes sense. There's just a lot of backstory.
Yeah.
For every...
There's a lot of exposition.
And it's great, though. It's it kind of, I would say, teeters between a somewhat difficult and somewhat medium-ish read. There is some pretty fancy language in there, but generally it is, I think, a fairly approachable book despite its size. One thing that's really interesting about it is, so it's about the Armenian genocide. If you aren't familiar with that, pretty brutal event. The Turkish government just was like, yeah, we're sick of all these Armenians. And so they exiled about 1 million of them and made them march into the desert, and a lot of them died, and they brutalized them in the process. So there's a lot of like very poetic and flowery language. And then there's like scenes where people are getting raped. It's just like, okay, I didn't really see that one coming, you know?
Yeah.
And it shifts gears pretty quickly. But I would say the attention to detail and the intricacy of the book is very impressive and very well done. It was published in 1933, and Franz Werfel was a Jewish man. So the book is considered kind of prophetic because obviously of what happened just after that. And also, I mean, the Armenian genocide isn't a super common event that's covered in American education, I feel like. And to this day, the Turkish government refuses to admit it even happened.
Yeah. I know very little about it. I know it happened, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to know other than what I just said. Like it was right at the start of World War I, and the Turks kind of use that as a pretext, as a reason to do this. And throughout the history of those two peoples, there's always been smaller like pogroms and abuse of the Armenian people. But the Armenian genocide was probably the most vile and brutal of them all. I'm learning a lot about the details of the event because the book is pretty historically accurate. Like I am kind of fact checking stuff as I'm going along. And it's interesting too, because a lot of the areas that are at play in the book are now back in the news with what's going on currently in the Middle East. And so it's interesting to just see the contextual difference of what was happening in these places, 100-ish years ago. I think you would like it. I don't know if it's like a total Andy book, but I do think you would enjoy it. I'm not like a huge Tolstoy fan, but it is Tolstoy-esque in kind of a good way, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm reading that, and that's pretty much it. I'm still kind of chipping away through Che, A Revolutionary Life, the biography by Jon Lee Anderson, but I more or less put everything else on hold just to get 350-ish pages into this beast.
Nice.
So if I can finish a book that long in 2 weeks, I'll be satisfied.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk about women in translation. We're going to go back and forth through 5 of our picks that we wanted to talk about that we've read, and then we'll get to books we want to read. So why don't you kick it off?
All right. My first pick I actually don't have. I realized this. It popped up as a book I wanted to talk about when we first discussed doing this episode. And then when I was putting together, packing up my books to bring over, Jesus Christ, I realized I don't have it. I had sent it to a friend. So, Kevin, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't read this book yet, do that soon because you'll really like it. It is The Employees by Olga Ravin. She's Danish.
Okay.
It's a short novel. I think I read it in a day. It is kind of sci-fi-ish.
No, wow.
So it takes place on this spaceship in the future with these human and humanoid-like characters, whatever. And they're kind of the chapters are these little like vignettes that are, I think they're like audio recordings with kind of like an HR type person. So these characters are all employees on this spaceship, and they go to this planet or galaxy or something, and they find these weird objects. And I don't think they're ever like fully explained what these things are, but they're keeping them on the ship, and they're kind of sequestered away and locked up. And all of these employees just become, totally enamored with them. And so these little vignettes are just about their kind of experience on the ship. Some of them are, some of it is, them talking about these objects, and then, their kind of fascination with them and how their kind of day-to-day life has been affected by finding these and bringing them onto the ship. And then others are just kind of like more or less workplace drama. But it's funny. It's well written. It's, like I said, the little vignettes. So they're just kind of quick snippets, kind of biting. But funny. It's kind of dark at times, heartfelt. Just fun good little book.
Cool.
Quick read, and like I said, I read it in a day. So
I've noticed a lot of more modern works in translation are on the shorter side. And I don't know if that's just because it's maybe easier for a newer author to kind of break into being published with a shorter work, or if people are intentionally writing that way because they feel that attention spans are shorter these days. But and there's a lot of great books that are short, obviously, but I just think that's interesting. So
Yeah, I've noticed that today as well, and most of the books I have, I think the longest book I have is just over 200 pages. So.
right, I mean, if you look at our stacks
Yeah.
compared to how big they normally are, especially yours. But the first book I'm going to talk about today is a book I read this month, and it's To Hell with Cronia by Ingrid Winterbach, originally written in Afrikaans, I believe in 2004-ish, and then translated by Open Letter Publishing in the last couple years. The translator is Elsa Silke, or Silk. I don't know if I'm not going to Google it. I'm sorry, Elsa, but you can correct me in the comment section. I was very ambivalent about the book, and I think I talked about this on our reading recap on the last episode, but I have not stopped thinking about this book, which is why I wanted to include it today, because I always see that as a very good sign.
Mm-hmm.
Even if while you're reading something, you're kind of like, I'm just not that engaged with it. If you think about it a lot after you read it, I think that's kind of the sign of a really good book, because it had a longer lasting
Definitely.
impact on you. I was having, we went out with the in-laws last night, and Katie's mom was saying she's in a book club, and I was like, oh, cool. You like reading anything good? And she's like, yeah. She goes, sometimes as soon as we're done reading them, I can't even like remember what they're about. And I was just like, I don't think those are great books then. I mean, look, if you're enjoying it while you're reading it, that's cool. But I don't know. It's just, I want something that's going to.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between good and great books.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, and a lot of that's about you as a reader, and we talked about that. But To Hell with Cronia is about the Boer War. I, for whatever reason, am drawn to books about tragedy, I guess. And it's kind of a ghost story. Extremely well written. The prose are incredible, but a lot of Dutch language in there that made it difficult. But I don't regret reading it, and I would say if you're interested in a South African work, this is probably a decent choice. And South Africa is the topic of the weekend, since last night was the UFC middleweight championship. Andy and I are both UFC or MMA fans, more accurately, and Dricus du Plessis from South Africa retained his middleweight championship. So, it kind of has like a Western-ish feel to it. It's about love, loss, tragedy. Decent book. It's sticking with me though. So
Nice.
yeah.
My next pick is another pretty short one. It is AGA Viva by Clarice Lispector. This is a really cool little book. There's not really any sort of narrative.
Interesting.
It's I would not recommend this book as a starting point for anyone looking to read Lispector, just because, like I said, the kind of total lack of narrative. If you're not used to her style and kind of the themes that she discusses, kind of that lack of narrative could pull you away from the novel.
Yep.
I think some of her other works where there's actually things happening, probably a better place to start. But it's about she might be I don't know if it's actually ever clarified if it's a male or female protagonist, but the protagonist is an artist of some kind of creative. I might be a sculptor, could be wrong. But just kind of having this sporadic, unordered meditation on the nature of life and time and things like that. So it's just kind of, what is it, 88 pages.
Yeah, going back to what we're just talking about, I was looking at a lot of Lispector's books. They're all quite short.
Yeah.
For the most part.
But it's just kind of like 90 pages of aphorisms. And some of them are, kind of chunky, a paragraph or a page long, and then others are just like a sentence or two.
And it was originally written in Portuguese, correct?
Correct.
She's Brazilian.
And it was originally published in 1973.
Cool.
So, but yeah, it's just, let's see if I can find a short one to read. Do I not have a plot to my life? For I am unexpectedly fragmentary. I am piecemeal. My story is living, and I have no fear of failure. Let failure annihilate me. I want the glory of falling. My crippled angel who contorts all elusive. My angel who fell from the heavens to the hell where he lives, savoring evil.
I'm in.
Just like...
Let failure annihilate me. I love that.
I who manufacture the future like a diligent spider, and the best of me is when I know nothing and manufacture whatever. Just like little,
kind of reminds me
quippy
of
little things like that.
It's reminiscent of The Trouble with Being Born by Emile Cioran, the nihilist philosopher. He has a book. The Trouble with Being Born is basically like that. It's just kind of one-liners throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's no real narrative, but that's cool.
And I think that's some of Clarice's best work, Lispector's best work, when, she just kind of sneaks in these little, biting one-liners or, short little...
if you can blow my head off with one or two sentences, I'm so in.
Yeah. She'll do that a lot where you're just kind of reading and it's just like a couple lines. It's like,
yeah.
What the hell?
Our friend...
Kind of make you pause.
Yeah, it's funny. Our friend Kyle Poland on Instagram, I believe he's doing only reading women this
all year long. Yep.
Which is cool. And he had posted a meme about Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, who neither of us have read, but a lot of people consider.
I've read a bit of it and just, I think I was doing reading too much.
Yeah.
It's a dense book. So I was like, I can't do this right now.
I mean, some people consider it a masterpiece, but I guess it's quite polarizing. He's on the opposite side of feeling like it's a masterpiece. And he shared with me a video interview with Bukowski, and he was trashing that book. And he was saying how every sentence needs to be important and pack a punch. So that just kind of reminded me of that. I'll post a link in the description, the show notes to that interview. It's quite entertaining. So the next book I'm going to talk about is History a Mess by Sigrun Pálsdóttir, who is from Iceland. And this was originally written in Icelandic. This is another open letter publishing book. So this is very interesting. It's written in kind of like a stream of consciousness style. And it's about a woman who is working on her thesis, which is she's studying the diary of a famous painter. And she thinks she discovers that the painter was actually a woman. And this would be like a groundbreaking discovery because at the time she would have been the first famous female painter ever. And it turns out that it was just 2 pages of this diary stuck together that made it seem.
Yes, I think I remember you telling me about it.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting in that way. It's a funny story. It's a book that made me laugh out loud, which is always a good sign because there's a lot of humor in it. But it does also have a very dark side to the book as well. So it's an interesting juxtaposition between those two things. The type of book where sometimes you do have to go back and reread a page or two to be like, did I miss something here? What is going on? Which is always fun, kind of leaving some room for interpretation. But I enjoyed it. And I have a few books that have a silhouette of a woman on the front like this. I'm going to have to do
That's a cool cover.
Video about that, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like an ink blot.
Yeah. A little Rorschach.
Yep.
All right. This is published. My next pick is What Kingdom by Fine Grable. This is another Danish name. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. So if someone would like to educate me on how to properly pronounce this,
Oh, I'm sure they will.
please let me know. This was published by the English translation, done by Martin Aitken. It was published this year. Published this year. And it was originally written in Danish in 2021. So pretty new, pretty recent publication. It takes place in Copenhagen. It's about a young woman who is living at a temporary psychiatric care unit for young people, more or less. People who are kind of going through it and they need a place to stay, but they're not. They don't have like a serious psychiatric condition that warrants them being in full-time care. It's just kind of, like I said, a temporary thing till they get back on their feet. But it's full of these. It's similar to what I said about the employees. It's these, little vignettes. Most of the chapters are like a page or two long. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but like that's 2 chapters.
Wow.
So,
quick read.
Yeah. Another one you could read in like a day or 2. But it's just full of these, small moments of humanity and connection between, the patients and the caretakers, and then interpersonal relationships between the patients. Just in a place like that where there's not a lot of opportunities for like grand gestures, small things that bring people together, I keep having to stop myself from saying inmates. I don't know why. A patient dyeing another patient's hair, which is just kind of a friendly thing to do. It's nothing grand or theatrical, not really a big gesture, but, a small, helpful little thing that like brings these people together. A caretaker being like, have you eaten today? And just this protagonist kind of fascination with, again, like little things, like talking about a chair or a piece of furniture in the hospital and what gives it its thingness, that something that I wouldn't say, that we take for granted, but something that has a more important purpose than, people really ever stop to think about.
Sounds very Jordan Peterson-esque. What is a chair?
I wouldn't go that far, but
what gives it its thingness?
Yeah, just a very heartfelt and thought-provoking book, and just similar to what I was saying about AGA Viva. Just moments where there's these short, biting lines. Let's see if I can find. This is a chapter. They call containment of the emotional register treatment. Just like little things like that, kind of experiences within this hospital, and like I said, just these humanizing, heartfelt moments.
But there's a lot in that one sentence.
Yes, yeah. So another short novella that just packs a punch and has a lot in there, especially intertextually, just between the lines, things that you can really examine and dig into. So
cool,
great novel. I loved it.
Nice. The next one I'm going to talk about is Fury by Cleo Mendoza. She's a Mexican author. This was originally written in Spanish, and this edition was translated by Christina McSweeney and published by Seven Stories Press. Excuse me. This is another book with vignettes, so kind of short chapters, really punchy, short paragraphs, very bizarre. Fury is such a apropos name for it because the book is just packed with rage and violence and brutality and just gruesome, grotesque language. I don't know. It's so hard to explain. It's kind of like a generational family story, but the novel starts with two enemy soldiers with each other at gunpoint standing over the dead body of a child that one of them just shot during a civil war. And so
it only gets worse.
And it only gets crazier from there. There is rape, incest, just like pedophilia. There's like everything in this book, and it's just at times it's like, oh my god, this is like a lot. But it's also very engaging. I found it hard to put down. Just kind of masterfully written with a mixture of, I would say, postmodern style and incorporating a lot of maybe Mexican folklore. So yeah, I don't know that I fully got everything in this book because I think a lot of it's like culturally contextual to Mexico. And so my knowledge of that topic is pretty sparse, but in general, I think I kind of understood the meaning, and it was just a really wild ride. And yeah, I would recommend it for adults, not for kids.
All right. Well, when was that originally published? I know it
Pretty
was
recently.
just published in English, but
I don't know if it'll say in here. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not.
it usually does.
2021,
Okay.
and it was translated this year.
Cool.
Or 20. Oh, wait. Yeah. First published in 2021, translated by Christina McSweeney, 2024. So it's a very new book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, carrying on with the theme of dark and gruesome novels with very gritty prose, I have got Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. This was on the New York Times top 100 books of the century.
Is she Mexican also?
Yes. One of the small handful of books that I felt deserved to actually be on that list. But it takes place in kind of a small, impoverished village in Mexico. And it starts off with these two characters. And similar to Fury, starts off with these two characters finding a dead body that's washed up on the bank of a river going through town. And this dead body is the local witch.
Oh.
Is this woman that is a very, I wouldn't say polarizing, but negatively viewed person within the village. And it kind of just goes back and, I'd say backwards from there, but kind of goes back and gives the whole backstory of how characters within the town got wrapped up with this and involved with this witch and just their own lives. And it's dark, man. It is. There's some very heavy stuff. There's
What is going on in Mexico?
right. I don't know.
And when was that written?
It was originally published in 2016,
Okay.
and then
So both of these are fairly recent
the
books.
English translation was 2020.
Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head if there is any incest. Maybe incest light. I think there's some weird relationships between like step fathers and stepdaughters. If I'm remembering the relationships correctly, but there's definitely rape and some pedophilia. And the writing is incredible. Like it's, obviously not light subject matter.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to make something like rape and pedophilia compelling.
Right.
But Melchior just gets a hold of you and does not let go for the entire novel. So, and it's, like I said, it's about all of these characters, someone who has gotten involved and does weird, shady business dealings and relationships with this witch, and kind of the backstory of what led that character into a position to have to or want to get involved and do these things with the witch. It's a great novel, but it's heavy.
Yeah.
So
Cool. My next choice is my only nonfiction featured today, and it's a little bit of a cheat. It's Into That Darkness by Gitta Sereny. And the reason why it's a cheat is because this book was actually originally written in English. However, it's a caveat to this. It's all of the interviews were not done in English. So she actually translated all of the interviews that she did herself and then wrote a book in English. So this is a series of interviews primarily with Franz Stangl, who was the commandant of Treblinka during the Holocaust. And the interviews were conducted when he was imprisoned and awaiting trial at the Nuremberg Trials in the 70s. So, it took quite a long time for these people to be found and tried. But she also traveled to South America to hunt down his relatives that had also, fled Germany after the Holocaust, and interviewed, his wife and people that knew him. It's an incredible work of journalism, and really an attempt to try to understand this person's thought process and how you could become such a vile creature. I think what I really appreciate about this book is a lot of people want to just write off Nazis as pure evil. They're just evil. They did it because they're evil. And I don't like that, because it's lazy. It's intellectually lazy. It's much scarier, in my opinion, to realize that this guy was kind of just a normal dude. He was a police officer in Austria, and he just got sucked into that system and moved up the ranks and became the head of a camp that was killing thousands of people a day. So that's way more terrifying to know that some Joe Schmo who probably, maybe had some authoritarianism tendencies, but they would never flourish without somebody watering those seeds,
Right.
Become this vile creature. And it's also really crazy to see the mental gymnastics that he does to kind of justify it.
Right, I'm sure.
He actually tries to claim in the book that he had really no idea what was going on in the camp that he was running. It's like, dude, get bent. You were there, man.
Yeah.
And he also kind of says well, even if I did know, it doesn't really, I never actually hurt anybody myself personally. It's well, that still doesn't make it okay.
Yeah.
So really terrifying book, extremely well written, very interesting, just a gargantuan work of journalism that I think a lot of people should read.
Have you ever heard of The Kindly Ones by Jonathan Littell? So I haven't read it. I have a copy. But it's similar to Into That Darkness. It's fiction, but I don't know if he ran a camp or something like that. But the protagonist is a former Nazi officer. It takes place after the war.
Yeah.
After he's moved to France and kind of reinvented himself as just a normal middle-class guy that owns a factory.
Well, a lot of the Nazis that escaped did do that.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
So I've heard it's a great book, and it sounds like basically from everything you just said about Into That Darkness that you would really dig it.
Yeah, I really like to kind of do the fiction and nonfiction version of a topic.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because obviously with fiction you can kind of go places that you can't go with nonfiction, or sometimes when you're doing a work of nonfiction, there might be some pieces missing that make it hard to have a consistent narrative or storyline, I guess, for a better way to phrase it. So yeah, that's kind of like the 40 Days of Musadag. It's like there's a bunch of books about the Armenian genocide. The Burning Tigress, A Shameful Act, books like that are great nonfiction works, but then you can also get a more like on the ground kind of first person perspective through fiction narrative.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoy. So
yeah, I'm in the Conley ones, like a lot of prominent Nazi figures are involved in the story. The Goodreads references Eichmann, Himmler, Goring, Speer, Heydrich, Haas, and even Hitler himself.
So all the big ones.
Yeah, big players.
Cool. I'll definitely put that on my TBR.
Yeah. All right. And then my last pick, books I love by women in translation, is The Passion According to G.H., another Clarice Lispector novel. This one a little bit longer. There's a translator's note at the end, but it's 189 pages. This one does have an actual narrative to it, but similar to Agua Viva, like I was talking about earlier, this is kind of meditation on the nature of time and the meaning of life. But unlike Agua Viva, which is just kind of this, just kind of general musings, this is more of a metaphysical and existential crisis. So GH is the protagonist, and she's this sculptor in Brazil, Rio to be specific. She's well off, and she's going into, I think it's her maid's room. I think the maid has a day off. I don't remember off the top of my head if GH is like cleaning the room or just kind of snooping around. But she goes to open up the maid's wardrobe, and a cockroach starts crawling out. So she slams the door on the cockroach to kill it and basically just like splits it in half. And when she opens the door to see what she's done, like I said, the cockroach is basically split in half, and she sees its innards kind of pouring out. And that leads her into this crisis about the meaning of life.
Interesting.
So, and that happens like pretty early on, the killing of the cockroach. So it's just this like, I wouldn't say fever dream, but like it's kind of torrent of what is the point of all this?
Yeah.
So,
valid question.
but everything I said about Agua Viva, it's the same thing. A lot of these like, these little biting one-liners or, paragraphs that just pack such a punch. I'll read another one from the end. Everything that characterizes me is just the way that I am most easily visible to others, and how I end up being superficially recognizable to myself. As there was the moment in which I saw that the roach is the roach of all roaches, so do I want to find in me the woman of all women.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, this book, and it tickled my fancy then. I'll definitely have to read that.
Yeah, I think the former philosophy bro inside of you would really enjoy her work.
Oh, philosophy bros. Okay, funny you should mention it. It's like a fever dream at times, because Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin is my last pick on my list. This is also originally written in Spanish. She is Venezuelan or Argentinian. I think she's Argentinian. And this was originally published by Riverhead Books. So this is kind of weird. It's like a woman is dying, I think. It's never quite clear what's going on in this book because it's very hallucinatory, but she's kind of laying dying and having these hallucinations about her family and her kids and her life. And I guess this book was kind of a scathing critique of a lot of the environmental concerns in Argentina. Is that where? Just double make sure I'm getting this right. You read this as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's again very much like vignettes. I found it to be a page turner. It was a pretty easy read as far as the language was concerned, despite the narrative being quite confusing. And it just, what a perfect name for the book, because it made you feel like you were having a fever dream. And kind of had this foreboding sense to it throughout that just kind of hangs over you when you read it and makes you feel a little uncomfortable the whole time, which anytime a book can give me a visceral kind of experience, I really am drawn to that.
Totally.
So, and again, quite short. I think this was less than 200 pages. Yeah, it's about 182 pages. So definitely worth grabbing and ripping through if you want to dip your toes into women in translation. So let's keep this ball rolling here.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the 5 works in translation that we're most excited to read from women.
Yeah. Before I get into my stack, I will plug our book club because obviously I'm excited to read Death in Spring by Mircea Rodoreda.
Correct.
So easily could have put that in the stack, but
yeah,
I figured it's goes without saying that
for sure.
We're looking forward to our pick for the book club.
Correct.
So
yeah, that starts September 1st. Currently, Open Letter Publishing is having a sale, 40% off works in translation from women, written or translated by women. And that book is on there. So if you are in the U.S., you can order directly from them, get 40% off. I do not believe they ship internationally, so you will have to procure it from Schmamazon or one of those places.
ironically, none of the 5 books I have with me are from the mountain of books I ordered from that sale. But
same, my half my pile, or actually the whole pile is right there behind us. But
all right, my first pick is from another great indie press, Deep Vellum. It is Texas, The Great Theft by Carmen Pelosa. Pretty much what it sounds like. It takes place in, oh, sweet. Deep Vellum sent me a bookmark.
nice.
It takes place in 1859. It is about the Mexican invasion of the United States, a little known Mexican invasion of the United States. Again, based off the title, pretty self-explanatory. It's about kind of set in that Texas-Mexico borderline, and about how the U.S. basically stole Texas from Mexico. So,
shocker.
But
sounds awesome.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple people that have read this that, well, it's maybe not Deep Vellum's most well-known book. I think that would probably be Solenoid.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the best books they've published. I've heard nothing but great things about it, and it seems to be lesser known. So excited to check it out, especially given that it's about a pretty part of U.S. history and
plenty to choose from.
Yeah,
on that front.
Close your eyes and point.
Yeah, cool. My first pick is Out by Natsuo Kirino, originally written in Japanese, and this is a 21st century book, I believe. Let me take a quick look. I think I would check the stuff before we do this, but that's what they would do on a real podcast. This is published by Vintage Books. Oh, so the English translation was in 2003, and it was originally written in 1997. But I'll just read the blurb here on the back. The mesmerizing novel tells the story of a brutal murder in the Tokyo suburbs as a young mother who works the night shift making boxed lunches strangles her abusive husband and then seeks the help of her coworkers to dispose of the body. So I've heard it's pretty intense. So, and I do tend to gravitate towards works in translation from Asia. So, yeah.
Right on. My next pick is Kintu by Jennifer Nansabuga Makumbi. This is published by Transit Books in 2017. It was originally published in 2014. I won't read the whole blurb, but first published in Kenya in 2014 to critical and popular acclaim, Kintu is a modern classic, a multi-layered narrative that reimagines the history of Uganda through the cursed bloodline of the Kintu clan.
Yeah, I might have to pick that one up for a book from Kenya as I read The World.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that drew me to it. Between both men and women, most of the works in translation I've read have been either Eastern European or Latin of some kind, whether it's from a South American country or Spain.
Yeah, I think we're both pretty light on Africa.
Yeah, I've never read anything from Africa, so
I've just read Americana by Chimamanda Adichie, but she's Nigerian and English is their official language, so it wasn't translated. But
yeah, I first heard about this. I believe Transit is publishing a new edition, or has recently published a new edition. I don't know off the top of my head if there's any differences between the two. I would imagine it's probably just got like a new foreword or something like that.
yeah,
But someone at Transit told me about it. Sent me a link to their upcoming catalog sometime last year. And I saw this on there. And then I saw it the last time I went to Gray Matter. So
cool.
Grabbed it. It sounds really interesting. So
Nice. Next on my list is Human Acts by Han Kang, Korean author. Her most popular work is The Vegetarian, and I probably will read that at some point as well. But of her books, this one sounds the most interesting to me. And it's got 2 bullets on the front. So that's, as a man, that really drew me in.
yeah.
But no, it just, let me see if there's a synopsis here. I hate when they put just like plugs on the back. It's very annoying. Yeah, I don't know if there's a synopsis on it, but from what I understand, it's about kind of like the rough life of Korean suburbs and the violence that takes place there. I think it's set in the 1980s. So, yeah. And I don't know if it's Hong Kong or Kang. I always thought it was Kang, but then I heard Chad post say Kong. So who really knows? If anyone knows, let me know. What do you got next?
Up next, I have got Triste by Dasa Drinjic, who I learned about through a friend of the program, Rick Harsh. He's a big proponent of her work.
She Bulgarian or
She
Czech?
is Croatian.
Croatian? Yeah.
Yeah. And I have one of her other novels as well. But this is about, oh, damn. It starts off with a epigraph from Borges. So I'm
right
sold.
up your alley.
But it is about a woman who's sitting in a cafe in northeastern Italy, waiting to be reunited with her son, who was fathered by an SS officer and stolen. Doesn't say anything about it on the blurb, but I'm going to assume it was not a consensual situation. Either part of it, the conceivement or stealing away. but she hasn't seen her son in 62 years.
Oh, wow.
So she's sitting there, and while she's waiting to be reunited, she's kind of ruminating and reflecting on the experience of and massacre of Italian Jews.
Wow. That sounds incredible.
In the concentration camps of Trieste. One of the things, I don't remember if it was in a podcast or on a YouTube video or where I learned about this, but in the middle of the book, about 150 pages in, how long is the book? The book is 350 something pages long. About 140 pages in, there is a 43-page section that's just a listing of kind of an in memoriam of about 9,000 Jews who were deported or killed from Italy. And they were talking about this section being really polarizing is the wrong word, but kind of conflicting, because obviously there's not any narrative there. There's nothing that really moves the narrative forward. But do you just kind of skim over and flip through these 40 pages and not read any of the names?
Right.
And kind of do what history has done and erase them?
Right.
Because, you know, I don't know about you. You've certainly read more novels and nonfiction that have to do with World War II than I have. I don't think many people think about Italy as a region where Jews were greatly affected by the Nazi regime.
Arguably, in some ways, it was worse, but yeah. But yes, I agree.
Yeah.
That's not how people think of it.
Things were not then to say things were great in Italy, but
right.
You know, you normally, obviously, Mussolini wasn't great, but you think about Poland and Germany and kind of the surrounding areas, as being the most affected. So you kind of, it's this game of like, okay, do you just kind of skip over it and continue the path that we've gone down where these things are forgotten? Or do you really take your time and read all 9,000 names and just feel the crushing weight of how awful humanity is?
Yeah. I mean, the same could be said for a lot of tragedies. We've talked about it before. The lack of acknowledgement of South Vietnamese soldiers when they had to flee Vietnam during the Vietnam War. When they came to the States, everyone was, kind of, I mean, obviously there's people, very outspoken people about the war in general, and soldiers from Vietnam probably didn't get the reception coming home that maybe Americans had in previous wars, but the South Koreans were basically treated like second-class citizens.
Right.
Also, within the Holocaust itself, the predominant focus was on the Jewish population, but there were also quote-unquote gypsies that were targeted, and disabled people, and people of color, and gay people. And so it was anyone that basically wasn't straight, white, German.
Blonde hair, blue eyes. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's I don't know. I don't know if I could sit there and read 9,000 names, but at one go. But
which is
who's the publisher?
This edition is Mariner Books.
That sounds right up my alley. So I'm definitely gonna also put that on my TBR.
Yeah. But again, like you said, like that's kind of the point. Can you sit there and read all of these names?
Yeah.
It kind of it's an emotional struggle from every angle.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds amazing. Next on my list is My Annihilation. by Fuminori Nakamura, another Japanese author. This one is originally came out, I want to say in the early 2000s. (2016) it was published, translated in 2022, and it's out from Soho Press. And I just love this first line on the back. Turn this page and you may forfeit your life. With my annihilation.
I'm sold.
Yeah, exactly. With my annihilation, Nakamura, master of literary noir, has constructed a puzzle box of a narrative in the form of a confessional diary that implicates its reader in a heinous crime. So, just sounds awesome. Abstract, unorthodox, all the things that we tend to love here on the Life on Books podcast.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got next?
Up next, I have Melina by Ingeborg Bachmann. Originally published in German in 1971, Ingeborg Bachmann invites the reader into a world stretched to the very limits of language. An unnamed narrator, a writer in Vienna, is torn between two men, viewed through the tilting prism of obsession. She travels further into her own madness, anxiety, and genius. Melina explores love, death styles, the roots of fascism, and passion.
Man, you got all the fascism up in your your stack here today.
I think I first found out about this one through. Well, I know our good friend Seth, Waste Mailing List, is a big fan of this book. I don't remember if he is the person I learned about it through, or if just seeing him talk about it is what really drew me into wanting to read it. But I'm really excited for it. I've heard nothing but great things about it. And,
it's tough to have an in-depth discussion about books we haven't read.
Right. Yeah.
Hence why we're reading the blurbs.
This is, I picked this up at Gibson's at some point this year. It's one of those books, I was thinking about it. We've talked about it before. Gibson's generally has a pretty good selection.
Yeah.
They're not just kind of mainstream pop fiction stuff. They've usually got a good eclectic mix. But every now and then I'll see something like this and be a little bit surprised that they have it, just because it seems like it's something that's a little beyond the reach of just eclectic fiction. It's something that is a little bit more, not heady, but, something for people in the know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cool. No, it sounds, I'm actually kind of jealous of your stack so far. Next I have House of Spirits by Isabel Allende. She's a quite famous Chilean author. To my knowledge, this is one of her more famous works, if not her most famous work. It's written in the 80s originally. I don't know when this particular translation came out. 1985. But The House of Spirits brings to life the triumphs and tragedies of three generations of the Trueba family. The patriarch Esteban is a volatile, proud man whose voracious pursuit of political power is tempted only by his love for his delicate wife, Clara, a woman with a mystical connection to the spirit world. This is kind of like a book that when you are trying to compile a list of reading a book from every country and you get to Chile, this is kind of like you should read Isabel Allende, which is why I picked it. And I'd like to start with either, a book that is kind of one that's more notable, or if there is something in their collection that just really speaks to me. But this seemed like a good choice.
Yeah.
So
right on.
Yeah.
All right. And my last pick, in keeping with the theme of my stacks, I have got The Apple in the Dark by Clarice Lispector.
Oh boy.
I am really excited to read this one. She said it is her best work.
Oh, wow.
So I've been a fan of everything I've read from her. So
Is she dead?
Yes.
Okay.
To have her be like, this is my best novel. in this stunning new translation, the mysteries and allegories of the apple in the dark glow with a fresh, scintillating light. Martin, fleeing from a crime he believes he committed, plunges into the dark, nocturnal jungle. Stumbling along, he eventually comes to a remote ranch and finds work with the two women who own it. The women, tranquil enough before his arrival, are shaken by his radical mystery. Soaked through with Martin's inner night, his soul is in the darkness of creation. The novel vibrates with his perpetual searching. He's ever on the watch for life to take on the dimensions of a destiny.
How do you think you commit a crime?
Find out.
And where in her catalog does this line up as far as when it was released?
It was originally published in 1961, so pre-AGA Viva, and Passion according to GH was 64. So pre-Passion. New Directions has a small collection of her works that there's 4 of them. I don't know if the camera will, it'll pick it up. It's got, half a quarter of her face.
Yeah.
And you put the 4 together, you get the full portrait. And there, I guess you could say her best known novels, Near to the Wild Heart, which I'm almost positive was her debut. I know New Directions published the Chandelier, which, if I recall correctly, was written before Near to the Wild Heart, but I believe Near to the Wild Heart was published first. The 2 that I've mentioned today, and then A Breath of Life, which was actually published posthumously.
Cool.
So in terms of her whole body of work, I believe Apple in the Dark was kind of in the middle.
Interesting.
More or less. So, but that's everything I got.
Cool. Last book on my list is one that's fairly popular, probably maybe the most popular book we've talked about today, and that is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. Thank you. Who's Polish. She's the winner of the Nobel Prize. You have a book on your TBR from her.
The Books of Jacob.
The Books of Jacob.
Jacob, for the Anglophones listening.
So this is about a remote Polish village where basically dead bodies start popping up all over the place, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. I was just kind of drawn to the title of the book, Draw Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Sounds just metal as hell.
Yeah.
Which is right up my alley. And I think the cover art is cool. She's obviously a highly acclaimed author, and this is one of her more popular works, so I thought that would be a good choice. I must have read stuff from Poland before, but might as well add one more. So if you have a review of any of these books that we've talked about that we haven't read, please share your thoughts on them.
I know Travis, Mayer's Metafictional Musings on Instagram, has read Apple of the Dark and loved it.
Yeah, cool.
And Sean at Travel Through Stories is currently reading or just finished Trieste, and he's been really into that as well.
Nice.
So, but I don't know. He actually was the one that turned me on to Texas: A Great Theft, Sean. So,
yeah, actually, pretty much all the books on your list of want to reads caught my attention for sure.
Yeah. I'm easily influenced by
right
people on Instagram.
Same. So. Yeah, that's our list for today. I just want to say quickly thank you to everyone who's been watching the podcast on YouTube and listening in other places. Apparently, you can upload videos to Spotify, so the video version will also now be available on Spotify. I didn't realize that was a thing.
Yeah.
The show has been growing, so just please keep listening, commenting, engaging. That's the best way to support the show. Since we don't have a sponsor currently, I need to get back to finding somebody that's a good fit. If you have a company in mind that you think would be a good fit for the sponsor of the show, definitely send me a message. Links to the Life on Books book club can be found in the show notes, as well as joining our mailing list, which I've yet to send out a single email to. Somebody just commented like, I joined the mailing list. Are you guys sending out emails? I'm like, no, not yet. I just want to make sure that, there's a good amount of people on the list. I think we have about 200 right now, which is a good start. And that I have something worthwhile sending and landing in your inbox, so it's not just filled with junk. And then also just another quick announcement. I do regularly get messages inquiring about how I make my videos, how to do social media with book stuff, how to get free books from publishers. So I have put together a course, and the plan is for it to launch probably the same day that this podcast is coming out, what's the date on this coming Friday, Andy?
I don't know. 23rd.
So August 23rd. I hope to have it up by then. It's going to be, I'm going to launch, I believe I'm going to launch it with a special price of $15 a month. I'm going to add to it probably weekly or bi-weekly, and just teach everyone everything I know. And then also I'm looking for recommendations on a really good reading or literacy related nonprofit to work with, because I do want to donate a portion of the profits to a cause like that. Yeah, it's not really meant to be a big money-making scheme. It's just I get these questions, particularly for authors. I get DMs from authors probably daily saying, can you read my book and plug my book? I wish I could say yes to all of them, but there's just not enough time in the day.
Yeah.
I know that every other influencer or whatever you want to call it who has more than probably 2,000 followers on Instagram probably gets similar DMs. The most effective use of your time, in my opinion, as an author is to build your own social media following. And it doesn't need to be 50,000 people. You can get much better results than you think with a small following. And a big part of that is how many followers you have now, the way all these social media platforms work. It doesn't really make a huge difference in how many people can see your content. I had videos that did 500,000 views when I only had 2,000 followers on Instagram. There's about 1.5 to 2 million books self-published every year. And most books sell, I forget the exact stat, but I think like most books sell less than 100 copies. So if you were to build, a small but tight-knit community around your own social media, you could potentially sell 1,000, 5,000 copies of your book much more easily than cold DMing people like me, asking me to read your book and review it, which is just unlikely for two reasons. Number one, there's already a bajillion amazing books out there that I want to read,
right,
and I'm never going to get to all of the books I've already become aware of and want to read. But secondly, with the volume of messages that people like me get, it's like, how do you decide which ones to read and which ones not to?
I don't get nearly as many messages like that as you do, but
you still get them.
I get them, and I always tell people, like, my response is, I'd be happy to, and no one's ever offered to pay me. I should say that. They just asked me if I wanted a copy to review.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I get offered to be paid. Sometimes it's just, will you do it, please?
And I almost always tell them, like, I'd be happy to read it. I have so many other things that I am interested in reading right now. So if it's a time-sensitive thing, or you're hoping to get a review published soon,
like before the release date,
maybe ask someone else.
Yeah.
Or like, I might not be the reader for you, and there's no hard feelings. If like, I have no problem. Like if you're like, no, I really, like you said, want something out there before the release date. Like I'm reading 6 books right now. Like I can't.
Yeah.
It's another reason why I've stopped reaching out to publishers asking for ARCs. I messaged you because I know you got, we were talking about this because I know you got a message like asking how to get free books from publishers or something like that.
Yeah.
Publishers give books away like candy.
Yeah.
If you have an Instagram account with more than 100 followers and you've made 2 posts about books, most publishers will have some sort of publicity email account or address listed on their website. Just send them an email and don't be a jerk, but ask them if they, would be willing to send you a review copy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I've stopped, because at first you get that kind of dopamine effect of like, oh, I'm gonna get free books. I'm cool. I'm a literary insider. And then it's like, oh, I have to read this now.
Yeah.
And
if you're mood readers like us, oof,
right,
that's tough.
And I talked about it a few episodes ago. I have a copy of Krasnohorkai's upcoming novel pre-ordered, and I've seen a few people on Instagram posting that they've been reading the Arc, and I'm like, I know I'm going to read that novel. I'm probably going to read it around when I actually pick up the finished copy, but like I've got so much on my plate that between just what I'm reading right now and work and other stuff, like I don't want to rearrange my very tentative, loosely planned reading schedule and then on top of that feel compelled to share some substantial thoughts about the novel. Like I'd rather just read it when I get it and enjoy it.
Yeah, it is fun to get free books, but it can become quickly overwhelming.
Yeah.
So the course, I was kind of on the fence about doing this because I feel like there's a stigma around online courses. But after our discussion with Chad, where he was like, the best thing you can do to help reading and literature is to like make more content around that stuff.
Right.
I was like, okay, I have to do this because I kind of already had the idea in mind. I'd created the outline for the course, but it's literally going to cover everything. So it's going to, from how I come up with ideas regularly, the tools I use to create ideas and track the ideas, my scripting process, my production process, so lighting, audio, the whole 9 yards, how to do it with just a cell phone, how to use inexpensive products, how to use expensive products if you want to go crazy on it, how to optimize your Instagram bio, best posting practices, mindset stuff, sources of inspiration, how to track trends. I mean, there's a lot in there, and you can go as you just get like the down and dirty foundational stuff, or if you want to do deep dives, it's going to have all that content. And it's really geared for if you're in one of these 4 categories. If you want to be a book influencer or are a book influencer, if you're an indie author, an indie publisher, or a small bookstore, there's modules in there for each of those groups. Specifically, there's ideas lists with 50 or more ideas ready to go for each of those groups. So you have a launching pad for like what to even create. And it's, it's one of those things where the way I look at it is, sure, I'm not the biggest creator in the world, but my Instagram and my TikTok both have 50,000 followers. And the fact that their performance has been pretty much the same tells me that that's not a fluke. Obviously, we're growing now on YouTube now that I've been doing a little bit more with it. I don't have any formal education in literature or English. I'm not particularly good looking or intelligent. So for me, I feel like everything that we've done with this kind of brand, for lack of a better term, has been intentional, and we've been able to create the outcome that we want. And, there's other creators, and I'll use Books Are Sick as an example, super popular account, growing very fast. He doesn't do anything kind of quote unquote right. And, it's funny because I chat with him all the time. Like he asked us the other day, we have a group chat with a couple other people, and we were like, oh, Instagram carousels, you can post 20 photos now. He's like, what's a carousel? One time I asked him something about one of his Instagram analytics. He's like, I don't even know how to look at those. And so I think a lot of times what happens is people will look at an account like his and try to like emulate it. And it's like, Nick just has something natural about him that people really resonate with, and that's why his account's growing. For most of us, that is not reality.
Right.
We can't just go on there and just like wing it and get 200,000 followers. So we do have to be a little bit more intentional about it. And my goal is to try to kind of cut out the headache for a lot of people and the guessing game, and just have a more clear path for them. So that's my shameless plug. Every dollar we make from all the stuff we're doing just goes pretty much right back into creating even more content. So do with that what you will. Anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I want to add a quick, reading tip, if you will, because we got a message or a comment, on the reel that you shared when we posted the Omen Setter's Luck episode. Because someone asked us if we could do an episode on books that we know we're supposed to read but regret afterwards. And they mentioned a book that they're about halfway through and just find a total snooze fest.
Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro.
I wasn't going to mention the book, but
yeah, I liked it.
Yeah.
It is a slow burn, though.
Yeah. There's nothing you're supposed to read.
Correct.
If you don't like, and it took me a while to get to really be okay with this. If you don't like a book, don't read it.
Yeah.
It's not that serious. There are, I've talked about this before. There are a handful of books that I feel like I should read just because of their, like Ulysses and Moby Dick are pretty much the two. Just because their importance and effect on literature as a whole, and especially the novels of the mid to late 20th century that I really love. But I don't think I'm supposed to read them. If I don't enjoy them, I'm not going to keep reading. They're long books too. Like I have to finish this.
Right.
If you don't like a book, stop reading it.
Yeah.
I mentioned 5 books that I want to read today, and all of them sound like they're up my alley and that in theory I should enjoy.
But you might not.
But I might not. And if I'm not enjoying them, I've got several hundred books at home that I haven't read yet. I'm not going to waste time on a book I don't like.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't either.
Yeah, I completely agree with your sentiment, and I'll add a little bit of context to that, which is when I say I don't read books that I'm not enjoying, that is a little bit too simplistic. There has to be something redeeming about the book for me, and it's not a universal thing. So some books I might quote unquote enjoy because they're entertaining. Other books I might enjoy because they make me think.
Yeah.
Even if I might not be super in love with the writing itself and I don't feel like the book is a page turner, I still am enjoying it in the sense of I feel like I'm getting something out of the experience.
Yeah.
Books that make me feel, books that teach me something, but not every book has to do all of those things.
Yeah.
So I follow this guy, Blake's Book Club on Instagram. He's much more in the personal development kind of book style content, but I do think he does a much better job of it than most people do. It's a little bit less like hackneyed, I guess. But he did post something recently that I kind of disagreed with. And it was just a quote from a book. He had highlighted it. And it said something about like reading speed is an indication of like the quality of your reading, and people who can read faster get more out of their reading than people who have to like slog through. And I was like, completely disagree.
It's hard to disagree.
Completely disagree, because you cannot treat reading, in my opinion, as a purely transactional experience of I read this book, now I know this thing. It cannot be that, because if that is how you treat it, you will miss out on books like To Hell with Cronia, which while I was reading it, I was like, I'm not super in love with the story. Like, it's not totally drawing me in. But now for 2 weeks afterwards, I've been thinking about it and mulling it over and
Right.
continuing to develop myself as a human being on a whole for a longer period of time, rather than like, I read this book and now I have an investment strategy, or now I know how to handle objections next time I ask for a raise. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it doesn't need to be this tactile or tangible piece of information that it's a one-to-one transaction. I read the book and I got this thing out of it. So yeah, don't read books you don't like, but don't give up on books just because they're hard or you're not in love with them. If they're doing something for you,
Right.
I will tend to push through.
Yeah. And don't be concerned with how fast you read.
Definitely don't be concerned about fast.
I'm a fairly quick reader, depending on the book, of course. But sometimes I'll finish a book, or even just like a section of a book, even if it's just like a chapter or a short passage, and I'll kind of be like, I should have probably been a little bit more careful and slow.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think AGA Viva is a perfect example of that. Like, it's 90 pages. There's not, like I said, there's no narrative, and it's broken up. So there's not a lot of blank space, but there's enough where it's not just wall-to-wall text on every page. You could easily read that in an afternoon, or one sitting if you don't really have anything going on. But I think if you just tried to, like, 90 pages, I'm going to blast through it, you're going to miss a lot of what Lispector is trying to say.
Yeah, I've always been somewhat on the fence about kind of reading volume in terms of number of books. I'm very staunchly against it now, chasing numbers, and I've made content about that, and I will continue to do so at the end of every year. But the book that really, really started to shift my thinking about that was Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a journalist. He goes to...
Isn't that Sleepwalking with Einstein?
No, it's Moonwalking.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah, Moonwalking with Einstein. He goes to... He's working for some rinky-dink newspaper or something, and he gets this assignment to cover the American Memory Championship. And so there's literally a competition for people to see how good their memories are. And it's essentially constructed like... you have limited time to study a deck of cards or whatever, and then you have to repeat what the order was and all that. But he gets roped into training for it, and then he eventually goes to compete himself. So it's kind of like gonzo journalism, I guess. And in that book, he talks a lot about the history of memory and story and books, and he brings up the fact that before modern printing techniques, owning a book was such a luxury and such a rare thing, and literacy was obviously not what it is today. And people would read a text and just pore over it again and again and just become so intimately attached to it and understand every single detail and just dig into it. And people wrote in a way that they could also give you something to really sink your teeth into. And that really stuck with me, because we now live in this culture of like, you have to read as many books as you can, and the more books you can read, the better it is. And it's like, nah, not really. I would rather read 10 books that there's something really substantial behind them, rather than read 50 or 100 kind of meh, just quick whatevers, there's not really much substance to them. So
right.
There's your education with Andy moment for the week. Anything else you want to talk about before we let these fine folks carry on with their much more boring rest
Stop
of their
listening
days?
to us. Go read books.
All right, go read books. See you next time.